المعرفة والكتب مجال لا تنتهي الرحلة فيه. تبدأ كبداية العقل البشري في قرون كثيرة وطويلة. بدأت الأفكار تتطور، تتناثر، تتصادم لتنتج فكرا حيا أعطى ما أعطى من العلوم في مجالات معرفية مختلفة. المعرفة أيضا ولدت أفكارا تبحث في المعرفة ذاتها. لهذا يحل علينا ضيف كل من العالمين موريس هالي ونعوم تشومسكي. في ممنوع سنبحث معهما مواضيع عن الإلحاد، عن السياسة في الثورات العربية، في انتكاسات أحلام الحرية، في مجالات اللغة واللسانيات. تابعونا في حوارات مع البروفسير نعوم تشومسكي والبروفسير موريس هالي وبعض رفاق البحث والمعرفة ممن التقيناهم في هذا الحوار أو في هذه الرحلة من ممنوع. فابقوا معنا. أفرام نعوم تشومسكي ولد في عشرينات القرن الماضي لعائلة يهودية أمريكية. والده كان أستاذ لغة عبرية وإنجليزية، فيلسوف وأستاذ لسانيات بأكبر الجامعات الأمريكية، معهد ماساتشوستس للتقنية. هذا المعهد الذي عمل فيه لأكثر من 50 عاما إلى جانب صديقه هالي. نعوم تشومسكي هو مؤرخ وناقد سياسي ينتمي لليسار الليبرالي الأمريكي، ولعل من أبرز مقالاته وأعماله مسؤولية المثقفين The Responsibility of Intellectuals سنة 1967، وكتابه الذي كان محور رسالة الدكتوراه التي قدمها سنة 1957 التراكيب النحوية. وفي السبعينات حاضر عن المثقفون والدولة، وكتب تشومسكي عن الحروب والسياسة ووسائل الإعلام، وهو مؤلف لأكثر من 100 كتاب. ومعلوم أنه أكثر كاتب تم الاستشهاد بمقولاته كمرجع أكثر من أي عالم آخر في القرن العشرين والحادي والعشرين. تشومسكي ضيف ممنوع هذا المساء. Dr. and Professor Chomsky, it's an honor for our show Forbidden Memnoa to have you as our guest.
Pleasure to be with you.
And actually, I am the guest in your place.
Yes.
Professor, we know you have said lots about what's going on in the Middle East. How do you see the situation after 3 years of what's so-called the Arab Spring?
The Arab Spring was one of the most dramatic and exciting developments of the recent period. It appeared at first that the Middle East might be moving in a direction which has been, in a way, pioneered by South America during the past several decades. There, really dramatic events took place. For the first time in 500 years since the conquistadors, South America has begun to move towards independence from foreign imperial control that meant US control in the recent century, towards facing some of the tremendous internal problems of the countries, towards integration, not completely smoothly, but a very significant development. And it seemed that the Middle East was moving in that same path, not for the first time. There have been many democratic movements in the Middle East crushed by imperial force and internal dictatorship, so it's a revival of things that had happened before. And I think many positive developments took place. The reaction varied. In the oil dictatorships, the efforts were just crushed by force almost immediately.
Like Bahrain.
Bahrain or Saudi Arabia was less visible in Saudi Arabia, but the first
we don't hear about.
Well, the first mild efforts to participate in the Friday demonstrations
Yes.
were just crushed by force so fast that people were just terrorized. Nothing else happened. And in Bahrain, it finally ended up with a Saudi invasion, in effect. In Syria,
It's a nightmare.
turned into a nightmare very quickly. The Assad regime responded with such extreme violence that it elicited a militant response, and since then the country is virtually destroying itself.
What do you think about the Syrian situation when it's attracting all these fighters, Qaeda or non-Al-Qaeda, from many nations, and lots of fighters are from Western countries?
Well, there are many factors involved. One very significant one is the U.S.-British invasion of Iraq. Iraq had been in this pretty awful history, no time to go into it, but the invasion was just a sledgehammer smashing a vulnerable society without any concern, understanding for the nature of the society. The regime that the U.S. imposed immediately was strictly sectarian for the first time. It elicited sectarian rivalries. The brutality of the invasion led to a harsh reaction. Within a few years, the country was in flames.
Yep.
I mean, Baghdad had not been the most utopia, but people did live together.
My guest, Nasir Shamma, he's an Iraqi musician. He's one of the best oud player. He said Iraq used to be one of the best mosaic museum of like old languages, unique religions. Now it's disappearing. And now you're leading me to the topic of minorities. The last summer was a very bad nightmare for minorities. I'm sure you heard about what's happening to the Yazidis, to the old Christian communities. We know the Arab world, the Middle East, lost its Jewish community, and now it's the other communities, minorities. What can we say about that?
That's a consequence of an even greater catastrophe, the creation of a Sunni-Shia divide that had become, in the wake of the invasion, for various reasons, including what I mentioned, became very violent and brutal. It's tearing Iraq apart, it's tearing the region apart. That's a major factor in what happened in Syria. Not the whole story, of course. The main factor was the brutality of the regime's reaction to the first mild reformist proposals. But all of this is combined. ISIS is an outgrowth of it. Actually, there's a recent article by one of the leading U.S. government specialists on the Middle East, Graham Fuller's long background in CIA and other intelligence. The title is "The U.S. Created ISIS." He says, I don't mean that Washington sat down and planned and created ISIS. He's not taking part in the rampant conspiracy stories that circulated in the Middle East.
Yeah.
He's saying that the effect of the U.S. invasion of Iraq was to elicit and exacerbate sectarian tensions, which led to Shiite repression, Sunni reaction, finally the extremist fringe of the already extremist Wahhabi doctrines.
These are the internal factors. Like we have the majority doesn't allow minorities in the Arab world to speak freely, even before, like in our history, it's part of our history.
Yes, that's true in many cases, but this became much worse.
Yes.
It became a major internal war right now. ISIS on the one hand and the Shia militias on the other are brutal and violent. And as I say, it spread throughout the region. It's also led to international conflicts. The always latent conflict between Iran and Saudi Arabia has now exploded. It's all of this is in addition to Israel's violent takeover of the occupied territories. Again, last summer with the horrible attack on Gaza. So it's just a cauldron of animosities and conflicts and disasters. But going back to the Arab Spring, I think it's there is a regression, undoubtedly, particularly in Egypt. I mean, Libya is just
another chaos.
You know. But Egypt's the most important country in the Arab world, always has been, and the repression in Egypt is very serious and unpleasant. I think Egypt is moving into one of the worst periods in its history.
How about Tunisia?
Tunisia is the one relatively bright spot. The uprising did succeed in eliminating the French-backed dictatorship and opening some space for direct participation. The government did step down. It's hasn't imposed an Islamic dictatorship, nothing like that. And there are...
Dear Morris, today we had a good discussion with Professor Chomsky, and we're honored to have you part of this show. If you can tell our viewers in the Arab world about Chomsky, the friend, and the Chomsky, the professor, you worked together for many, many years.
Okay. My collaboration with Chomsky had to do on a technical problem, namely the nature of the sound nature of English. You know, every language is made up of words, and the words are made up of sounds, individual sounds. So you say dog, d-o-g. I mean, so the word dog has three pieces, d-o-g. You know, the word pot has, again, three pieces, but p-o-t, you know, etc. I mean, this is a very brief way of explaining it. Now, the writing systems of many languages are essentially, they represent these sounds. Now, in Hebrew, which has a writing system, you know, they don't systematically represent the vowels. They only represent the consonants. And if you speak Hebrew, you're supposed to be able to guess correctly at the consonants, but at the vowels. Sorry, at the vowels, not at the consonants. I mean, you get the consonants and then you guess at the vowels. But a person who reads Hebrew fluently, and I think the same is true of Arabic, he doesn't read the vowels, but he can, because he understands what's going on.
Yep.
He knows what the vowels should be.
Yep.
So it requires, in addition to knowing, to know the vowels means to know a great deal about Hebrew.
Or Arabic.
Or well, if you have that writing, that writing system. Now there are writing systems where nothing is supposed to be left to guessing. Where everything is written out.
Yes.
And so there's what's called the phonetic transcription, and that is a way of writing down an utterance in some language without leaving anything out. But that implies, you see, that that the person who devises this system knows that nothing will be left out. I mean, it requires particular skills, and most existing systems are not quite they show things somewhat incorrectly. And one of the first papers that Chomsky and I wrote, it was a book really, called The Sound Pattern of English, had the aim of writing down the vowels and the consonants as they are produced in English utterances. And that's what we did, and you know, some people thought we were wrong, some people thought we were not wrong, but that was our first book, which came out in 1960.
And then you have a journey together at the same institute.
No, that's different. I mean, Chomsky got a job here at MIT, and so it's not he, but it's at MIT. Did you see him there? Did you go to his office?
Yes, we interviewed him today. Yeah.
Today in his office there.
Yep.
Well, and we've written various papers and books together, and we've been friends for many years. Although I shouldn't exaggerate. I mean, because Chomsky is, I mean, you know, I don't call him up when Tim misbehaves or when I have some problem at home. You know, we're not that close. I mean, but since I've known him for very many years, I mean, I think I've known him since 1951, but it may be 52 or 50, or I mean, around there.
50-ish.
Yeah, from the 1950s on, huh? And he got a job in our department. Maybe he told you this when he was first hired at MIT. I think it was 1955. He became a professor at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, which is where our department is located, and it's they who pay our salary, you know.
Chomsky the man.
Chomsky the man. So he's a colleague now, but of course he was my professor for 4 years, and he was also my thesis advisor. And I mean, I could tell you a lot of stories about him, both sort of touching and funny stories. I will start with the very last memory that I have of him from my student days. That is the very last interaction with him I had with him when I was a student, which was after I graduated, and I was getting ready to go to Philadelphia, where my first job would be. And he walked with me to the subway. In fact, he even came down to the train with me. And I gave him a hug and asked him, thanked him very much for everything he had done for me, and asked him, and said something like, "I wish there was something I could do for you. I wish there was a way I could repay you for everything that you did for me." And he said, "There is. If you think I helped you and did things for you, then do to others." And I thought, this is the last words that I had from him from when I was a student. And it's something that stayed with me. And it's actually, I think, shows the type of person that he is. But of course, I also have
I sense like he really does have a very good sense of humor.
Yeah. He's funny. So I have laughed a lot with him, but sometimes what is also funny is jokes that he does not intend to make. So yeah, no, he has. So for example, once I was agreeing with him about something in linguistics, and there was agreeing, and he was sort of arguing back, and I was arguing back, and he said, "Oh, you're just being obstreperous." And I said, "What is that? I don't know that word." He said, "Well, I'm not going to tell you. You go and look it up."
In a dictionary.
And yes, and then I said, "Why?" And he said, "Well, because they've done these experiments that if you do something yourself, you learn it better. Like, for example, they put people in distorting glasses, and they have them walk, and then their vision adjusts after a bit. But if you put distorting glasses on somebody and then you push them in a wheelchair down a path, the vision does not adjust. So instead of telling me what observance means, he could have, he told me this entire story. And I went and looked it up and then found out what it means. And then there's another story, sort of.
What is it? I didn't yet.
So
I thought I understood.
Yeah,
but
no. So
not really.
So obstreperous means to noisily defy orders or resisting command. So basically, just to disagree, in a sort of vehement and sort of stubborn way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If I say to you, Bab, that Chomsky, we never know, what do you say?
I say he has a sense of humor. I say he's wonderful with little children. He lights up. I say he's a fabulous grandfather. I say that he is sensitive. You probably know that. But there are ways in which he's sensitive that he just won't show, because otherwise he can't do the work that he does.
Mm. You worked with him for how long now?
20 years.
I think you know him better than maybe
I
anybody.
know him pretty well. I know him pretty well, but there's also a private side to him.
The latest movie, God Is Not Dead, mentioned Chomsky as one of the greatest atheists. How much do you agree with that?
I don't think I can make a comment on that. He doesn't go to church or temple on Sundays, I know that, or Saturdays or Fridays, or I think he's more like the Buddha. I think he's more spiritual than religious.
Do you see, does he have really a sense of spirituality?
Yeah, not in the
If we
traditional
put the religion
not in the
aside.
traditional sense. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, I think he does. I think there are things that he wants to believe, but I wouldn't say he's tremendously spiritual on the outside. But yeah, I think there are ways.
It's amazing when I told people I'm gonna interview Professor Chomsky. Some religious people or believers, they said, and by believers I said they believe in God. They said, "Oh, I wish if I can ask Professor, how can a non-religious person have such high morality? From where can he, like non-religious person like Chomsky, get his morality outside of religion?"
That's a complicated question. I mean, he was taught well by his parents, I think.
You think his
I think
religious
his mother
Jewish
and his father
background?
had a lot of, and I think even the way that they were morally had a lot to do with his upbringing and a lot of how his family was. They're all hard workers. A lot of them are doing work they're all active in some way. I'm not saying this well.
Yeah.
Edit, cut.
Oh yeah. They told me when his first wife was really sick,
Carol, yeah.
Carol, when she was really sick, then people, they saw the real Chomsky, the kind.
Yeah, I wasn't going to bring that up, but there is, I think it's in Colombia, there is a forest that was named after Carol. And that happened soon after she died. And he traveled there, and he, trudged up the mountain in his sneakers, which were coated with mud. And they called Carol's spirit in, and he said that was one of the first times that he really felt that. He felt that her spirit was there. He felt her there. And it was a surprise.
You told me about your blog. Can you tell my viewers about your blog? And I love to promote for it.
Well, my blog is really a way for me not to go crazy, because there are a lot of people that come here, Sufis and heads of state and little, when I say little people, I mean people who are doing, I shouldn't say little people who are doing great works of activism, people who are making documentaries, trying to get the word out there. And so many things happen that are out of the ordinary, I think because of where I am, that I had to write about them or I would blow up. And often I write about Noam's interaction. If a Sufi comes here and talks to me and says, he goes into Noam's office and he says, "Bev, I feel it here." And I say, "What is it you feel?" And he says, "The truth." I feel the truth in this office. And so then Noam comes out wearing the hat that the Sufi, gave to him and the robe. And I think I like to, I think it's such serious business that it's important to bring the humor into life all the time. And so I try to bring humor to Noam, and I try to bring humor to the office, and I try to write with I can't help but writing with humor because that's who I am. And so I try to show him in that light.
Bev, I thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
ننقل الرسالة. لكل بيت نضمد الجراح. نوجه الأجيال. نزرع الفرح. محطات، برامج، مواعيد، كل جديد لأجل إنسان مختلف.
عماد دبور، منتج ومقدم برامج على سات 7. هذا عماد دبور في ممنوع. هذا فريق ممنوع
مع عماد دبور.
عماد دبور
مع الإعلامي
عماد دبور.
Forbidden with عماد دبور.
أنا عماد دبور. أنا سات 7 في ممنوع.
لست كافرة، ومن له الإيمان حتى أدعى كافرة، وكل النعوت والصفات السافرة ألصقتها بي لأنني حرة ومغامرة، ولعبوديتك رافضة كافرة. أيها الشقي، وإن أحببتك فعلى حريتي لا مساومة. أشواقي إليك وإن أقلقتني فهي سحابة عابرة. كفاك نفاقا وشتما ومؤامرة. لست بكافرة، أنا ابنة امرأة حرة مجاهدة. وأبي أبى لي الخضوع، صعقتني كلماتك المنافقة، ولقضبانك الحزينة مغادرة. تلك وصية والدي، تلك وصية والدي، وأنا امرأة مقاومة. لست رخيصة كما تحسبني، ولست مقامرة. لست أمة ولا ملك يمين، لست كما تحسبني فاجرة. كفاك عويلا وشتما رخيص، كفاك لعبا بالكلمات، كفاك متاجرة، كفاك مناورة. فأنا لست لعبة تسلية ومسامرة. أنا لست كافرة، أنا لست كافرة لمن كفروني، حريتي قاهرة. أحب الربيع وكل صباح، أحب الحياة والموسيقى الراقية، وكل جمال وصوت رباب يذكرني بوصايا أبي أن لا أنحني صاغرة. قل ما شئت ولكنك ستعلم يوما أني لست عورة، فأنا امرأة ثائرة.
It's a unique case, Tunisia. It's 99% Sunni population, yet the Nahda and the Muslim Brotherhood, they couldn't win the election.
And they didn't try to maintain power by force, which I think is very important. So that's just,
How do you read that? How do you read it? How do you understand that?
well, Tunisia has been quite different. First, it's a small country. It's been somewhat separate from the general Arab world, even its location, and it's maintained.
Is it because of Bourguiba periods of? Is it because of the ex-president Bourguiba way of?
I mean, it has.
How do you see Bourguiba? What do you remember of Bourguiba?
Well, I mean, he was an anti-imperialist, nationalist who did achieve independence, left a mixed legacy, but enough of a non-violent element to it so that it's possible for the reformist uprising to succeed. Incidentally, this was not the first in the Arab Spring, it was the second. The first is generally forgotten. It was in Western Sahara, right before the uprising in Tunisia, where there were again efforts by the Sahrawi to protest. There were tent cities set up, crushed by Moroccan force very quickly with the backing of France and the tacit support of the Western powers. It's worth remembering that there are two colonies in the Arab world. One is Western Sahara, the other is Palestine.
Yes.
And the Western Sahara one has been kind of ignored, but it's pretty awful.
It is.
It's pretty horrible. I mean, Morocco, as soon as they won independence from Spain, Morocco invaded by force, sent in lots of Moroccans to try to overwhelm the outcome of any referendum, which so far they haven't allowed. Bitter attack against the indigenous population led to a guerrilla movement, Polisario, and it continues to try to seek independence. And there was kind of a pre-Arab Spring, if you want, right just weeks before the Tunisia outbreak. So Tunisia was actually the second case. But it has maintained itself. Egypt has a more complex and significant its impact, and the Sisi repression is pretty harsh. On the other hand, there is resistance. The labor movement is pretty
How do you
active.
explain like lots of liberal people and thinkers? One of them is Nawal Saadawi, your friend, and he's part of the extreme left, or the left. I don't want to use the extreme, but this is how they qualify it in mainstream media, which is, I try not to be part of that. She became pro-Sisi, and lots of people, they see the hope in Sisi instead of the Muslim Brotherhood.
Well, I actually don't want to go into personal things, but I did have discussions with them, and I thought they were making a very serious mistake.
Okay.
You cannot expect the military to bring democracy.
One time you said, sorry to interrupt, one time you said it's always the story, like in the Bible, about King Ahab and Prophet Elijah. That's a good example.
That's a very good example of something that goes
Can you
on.
explain it? Because the biblical story record and coming from you.
Well, the story is that King Ahab, who's the epitome of evil in the Bible, called the prophet Elijah to him. This is in the book of Kings. And he called the prophet Elijah to him, and he condemned Elijah for being, the Hebrew phrase is Ocher Yisrael, a kind of a literal translation would be hater of Israel. The reason is that
عدو إسرائيل.
well, the conception is a typical totalitarian conception, which comes right to the present. From the totalitarian point of view, if you criticize, Elijah, of course, was criticizing the acts of the evil king, warning about the dangers, denouncing their immorality.
Against the nation.
And so on. So, and Ahab was capturing that. Since the prophet was condemning the acts of the evil king, he was a hater of Israel, of the country. That goes right to the present. It's one of the, just to give you an illustration, back about 1972 or 73, Abba Eban, the Israeli foreign minister, Oxford graduate, very popular in the West, he wrote an article in one of the liberal American Jewish journals in which he informed the Jewish community in the United States that their task was to show that any criticism of, he said Zionism, but it meant Israel, should be either condemned as anti-Semitism or as Jewish self-hatred.
That's the Ahab idol.
That's the
But
Ahab
you choose
model.
to be the Elijah idol.
Well,
follow. Is that correct? Can I say that?
He actually mentioned me.
Yes.
The Jewish haters of Israel, he said, he mentioned two. One,
Chomsky?
I was one. I.F. Stone was the other. I liked the company. So
You like the
but that conception of you're anti-Semitic if you criticize Israel, or else it's Jewish self-hatred. That's King Ahab. You find it in totalitarian states. So, for example, I imagine under the Egyptian dictatorship, the Mubarak dictatorship, if you criticized the state, you were anti-Egyptian. In the old Soviet Union, if you were a dissident, you criticized the Kremlin, you were anti-Soviet, you're against the country. That's a standard phenomenon in totalitarian societies. Incidentally, it exists in the United States, surprisingly. There's the concept anti-American, which is common in the United States. It's commonly used for critics of U.S. government actions. They're called anti-American. If you criticize, if you're an Italian and you criticize the government of Italy, you're not called anti-Italian.
No.
It is a deep-seated totalitarian conception. And it's kind of intriguing to see that it does show up in formally democratic societies. And Israel's another case. Egyptian dictatorship is a case. Going back to the support of my friends in Egypt, many of them, for the Sisi government, I think they made a terrible mistake believing that a military regime would bring about opportunities for democracy. The military regime is going to protect itself and its own power. And in Egypt, that means a big economic system, a system of corruption, military force. That's what the military is going to protect and impose.
في حواري مع البروفسور نعوم تشومسكي تعرضنا إلى نوال السعداوي، وأولا شكرا لك على المساعدة لنصل إلى هذا اللقاء.
هو زميل وصديق وبيننا إعجاب، هو يعجب بكتاباتي وأنا أعجب بكتاباته.
وقد تحدث عنك مطولا في اللقاء.
اديني الشريط أشوفه
قريبا الحلقة. لكن في نقطة معينة تعرض إلى مصر وأكد على أنه ما جرى في مصر هو انقلاب، قلت لتشومسكي أنه مثقفي مصر لا يساندونك. حاولت
لا أنا مختلفة معاه في هذا تماما وهو يعلم. أنا مختلفة معاه تماما ومختلفة مع اليسار الأمريكي. أنا خسرت عدد من أصدقائي اليساريين اللي كانوا أساتذة معايا في جامعة نيويورك وفي ميل في أمريكا، خسرت صداقتهم خالص. ليه بقى؟ زي نوم تشومسكي، لأن اعتبروا ثورة 30 يونيو انقلاب. ليه بقى؟ أنا قلت لهم أنتم متأثرين بأوباما وبالسياسة الأمريكية في أمريكا وأنتم لا تعيشون هنا. ما عرفتوش إحنا عانينا قد إيه من حكم الإخوان المسلمين في مصر. شوف الإخوان المسلمين بيفجروا، الإخوان المسلمين بيفجروا في مصر دلوقتي.
ماذا تقولين لتشومسكي الآن وسيترجم هذا إلى الإنجليزية؟
أنا قلت له لا
دفاعا عن ثورة، عن ثورة 30 جوان وعن السيسي.
لا أنا لا أقول له، أنا كتبت مقالات وترجمت ونشرت باللغة الإنجليزية، ونوم تشومسكي يعرف أن أنا ضد فكرته وفكرة اليسار الأمريكي اللي هم معظمهم صحابي في نيويورك اللي قالوا ان 30 يونيو انقلاب. انا عرضتهم جدا وكتبت ضدهم وهم يعرفوا.
ماذا تقولين انت
بس نوم شمسي بيحترم رايي.
هو احترم رايك.
في ناس تانية.
انت ماذا تقولين عن 30 يونيو؟
30 يونيو ثوره شعبيه لم يفعلها السيسي. 30 مليون خرجوا وجي. انا حتى فاكره كنا متضايقين ان السيسي كان متباطئ فاكرين، وكان يقول انا هتدخل وما يتدخلش. حتى احنا في ناس شكوا قالوا ده مستني موافقه من امريكا على انه يتدخل ويشيل الاخوان.
في تليفون بيني وبينك من بيروت للقاهره ايام قبل وصول السيسي قلت انت تساندين وصول السيسي.
انا اساند الثوره. انا شاركت في جميع الثورات في مصر لما ببقى موجوده.
حكيتي لي لما طلعتي على الموتوسيكل على فكره
في يناير. فطبعا ثوره يناير وثوره يونيو ثورات شعبيه هامه في مصر، وثوره يناير هي الام التي انجبت يونيو. يعني لولا يناير ما كانش جه السيسي. السيسي جه بسبب ثوره الشباب دول في يناير.
Tell me a little bit about Chomsky, the friend, and Chomsky, the man outside of the academic circles.
Well, I find it difficult to really, you know, if I asked you to talk about a person you know very well, I mean, let's say your son, or a close friend of yours. It would be very hard to say what. Now, he's very serious, and when you talk to him about, he's most likely to take any question that you ask him and interpret it very technically, in the most technical sense, and try to answer you as though you were a fellow scientist and asked about, you know, the phonemes of English, or the phonemes of Arabic, or the phonemes of whatever language. And he's likely to give you, or at least if I were to ask him, that's what I'd get, and that's why I would ask him, because I'd like to know more about it, and he probably knows quite a bit more about it and has thought about it than which I haven't thought about.
Atheism. It's a big topic now in the Arab world.
Atheism?
Yes. And Chomsky, like people, they like to call him atheist, and I talked to him about that. He answered me differently. How can you like define atheism, and how do you see it as a phenomenon?
Well, I mean, you know, it's like believing in air. Now, do you think there's air around it, or do you think this is empty? I mean, the space between you and me, is it empty or is it filled with air? Well, I believe it's filled with air. Now, many people believe it's empty. And they're wrong. That's all there is to it. I mean, we know that the space, I mean, we can make various experiments to show that for example, you continue breathing. You know,
Yep.
I mean, whatever the space is between. Now, the reason you can breathe is because there's air in the space. And we know what air is. You know, we know there's so much oxygen in the air and so much hydrogen. And we can perform experiments and remove some of them from the air and have unpleasant consequences for us. And so there's no question, if you believe in I mean, if you understand what these experiments do, namely that they actually remove these gases from the air, then you will also understand the consequences, that you cannot fill your lungs with these gases, and that causes severe problems to your lungs. And that's we can perform, at least in principle. We wouldn't do that here because, I mean, we don't want to hurt you or anybody else. But in principle, we could perform such an experiment, and the experiment would show that because we do not get nitrogen or oxygen, you know, we have problems breathing. I mean, this will have immediate physiological effects on people in this room. But if you had the door closed so that the atmosphere in this room was isolated from the atmosphere outside this room, it would have no effects for people outside the room, but it would certainly have these effects for people who are in this room if you did that.
إذا التقينا بهذا الطالب الذي كان في لقاء مع الأستاذ تشومسكي. How do you know Chomsky outside of his books? I saw you talking to him.
Well, I've been a fan of Chomsky since, because I'm doing international relations with my degree, and I've been a fan of his because of not only his books, because of his old documentaries as well, because I've seen him throughout the decades perform so much and provide so much information for students in terms of, how ethnicities have moved along the regions and about linguistics. So, yeah, I've been a fan for ages.
And you're a Pakistani student, right?
I'm Pakistani, and I'm studying in Australia as well, but I'm Pakistani originally, yes, I am.
Are you planning to go back to Pakistan, teach, or...?
It would really depend. It would depend on how the circumstances are, but yes, definitely that would be one of the things that I would consider if I am knowledgeable enough and accepted there, yes, I would.
How was your meeting with Chomsky as the foreigner students in this place?
It was amazing, man. Like, I was surprised how humble he is and how down to earth. And you've seen the office, you were there upstairs. It's so it almost seems like a regular professor. It doesn't seem like Noam Chomsky up there. It seems like, someone you would just meet and without any consideration that he's one of the biggest in the occupation that he is. I was amazed with that, the humbleness, and I'm amazed at the fact that he still makes time for students and for people who are not able to, who are not at his level of communication. He still takes that time and talks to them and provides them the information that they need. Yes.
I saw you also taking pictures with him. Are we gonna see those pictures on Facebook?
I'm not on Facebook, but I'll definitely keep those photos because I think I'm doing my own thesis on drones and warfare, that kind of thing. So I just wanted it to be as authentic as possible because I use his teachings to write my own material. So if I can use that, I would use more so to provide evidence in terms of that I have met Chomsky, and it's not just like I'm using his material, because I've been in correspondence with him over email and written to him several times, and he's provided me good knowledge. So the photos are just additional evidence that
Thank you.
He was nice enough to meet me. Yes, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Nothing is obvious. At that time, not only were there no problems, but there couldn't be any. It was in principle impossible for there to be any more than superficial problems. I think that's a pretty welcome change. It has historical antecedents. It has some similarity to the early days of the modern scientific revolution. You go back to, say, the 17th century, Galileo and others began to be puzzled, allow themselves to be puzzled at things which had been taken for granted for millennia. So, for example, why does a rock fall and steam rise? Aristotle explained it, going to their natural place, end of that story. And that was accepted for millennia as an explanation. As soon as you begin to ask questions about it, everything immediately falls apart. Turns out all your intuitions are wrong about the rate of fall, everything else, and you get modern science. And I think there's a lesson there, one that we should have been learning, and that is it's very important to allow oneself to be puzzled by what seems on the surface to be obvious, and that can turn out to be quite illuminating, as I think we've learned in the last 50 years.
Thank you for your kindness, and I wish all the best for you. السلام على مشاهدينا في العالم العربي أينما كنتم. سنواصل في ممنوع البحث عن تفاصيل أخرى. هذا عماد دبور يحييكم من بوسطن مع الأستاذ المفكر نعوم شومسكي. لقاء مميز وحصري في ممنوع.